that fall is here and winter is not far away, most people think they can just forget about their trees and shrubs. But actually now is the best time of year to fertilize those trees and shrubs because their roots are still continuing to grow on into the winter. You need to wait for that first hard freeze and then apply your fertilizer. Now today I'm fertilizing this Nellie R. Stevens holly, and the recommended rate for trees and shrubs is about 4 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. I'm using urea today with an analysis 4600, and what it ended up being is that I'm going to put 1 pound and 1.4 pounds on this holly. So I've already measured that out, and I've got my gloves on to protect my hands from the urea fertilizer, and I'm just going to start away from the trunk and then a foot out from the drip line and scatter this fertilizer around the base of the holly. Now if your soil test indicates that you need to use a more complete fertilizer with phosphorus and potassium in it, then go ahead and use that. But otherwise just use a fertilizer that has nitrogen like urea like I'm using, or ammonium nitrate. Now after you've got this applied, you want to go ahead and slightly work that in with a hoe, being careful just to go about 1/2 inch into the ground, not to disturb those roots, but to get that fertilizer down there. And then if it's not going to rain, you can water that in. Now we think it's going to rain tonight, so we're not going to water this in right now. We're going to wait for that rain to come. Well, that water brings up a really important point. Going into the winter, it's very important to make sure that your trees and your shrubs have an adequate water supply for the winter. Water them in well in the fall, and then about once a month, go ahead and water them again if it's a dry season, because that's the best thing that you can do for them to protect them from the cold. Well, now that I've taken care of the holly, I want to give you a few tips on another popular evergreen in the landscape. If you have pines in your yard, you may be noticing that a lot of the needles are turning yellow or brown and falling off. And that's the case here on one of our pines, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you'll notice here, we've got some needles and they're turning yellow, and these are going to eventually fall off, but they're at the back part of the branch here. They're not out on the end. Now these are actually 3-year-old needles, and it's natural for them to fall off this time of year. So don't be alarmed if you're noticing a lot of needles down underneath your pine tree. Now you may have a problem with needles falling off if you have something known as Dothostroma needle blight, and we actually have a few of those needles here. Let me show you a case of that. You'll notice a cigar band looking area around the needle, and that's a needle blight, and that is a disease that can affect pines. It's not going to kill it, but it can weaken it where it won't go through the winter quite as well. So you may be experiencing some needle fall from that. And finally, the thing that should worry you is if you have some needles that are falling off at the tips. This is possibly Diploidia tip blight, and the best thing to do with this is to go ahead and go back to where you've got some good wood, prune that out of your tree, and dispose of that. And finally, this fall, while these needles are falling, it's a good idea to go ahead and rake those out from underneath the tree and dispose of those somewhere else. If you don't have any diseases, you could use these as a mulch somewhere else in your yard. But if you have the tip blight or something like that, it's best to go ahead and burn these. Well, finally, the best thing to do for your pines is to take care of them and keep them healthy. And one of the things on getting them through the winter is to provide them with water. Make sure they're watered well here at the end of the fall, and then water them about once a month throughout the winter if we have a dry winter. And that'll help your pines come through the winter great and start out next spring healthy and ready to grow. Well, I've given you a few tips on how to get your trees and shrubs through the winter, but a lack of water, improper fertilization, and disease aren't the only things that can affect them. Wildlife can be a big problem to your trees and shrubs through the winter, and we have a prime example of that over here. Right here we've got one of our lacebark elms that we tree spaded in this spring, so we're very interested in keeping this alive and well through the winter. And look down here at the trunk what's happened. We've had a deer come through and he's taken his antlers and scraped the whole side of the tree here. Well, we don't just have delinquent deer out here at Oklahoma Gardening, but it's the season of the year when the deer, the male deer, are in rut, and they come and they mark these trees. They've got a gland at the base of their antlers that has a scent, and they'll use that, rub along here to leave their scent, and also they're doing this to strengthen their neck muscles for when they have to fight each other, so they can really wreak havoc on your trees. Well, this has happened, and we have all this scar tissue here, and we want to protect this tree from this happening again, because the deer will actually be back, because he's now marked this, and he'll come back to the same tree. So we've set up a fence here, and we've also got some paper wrap that we're going to wrap our tree with. Well, first off, what we want to do to protect our tree from some of the other wildlife is to, again, pull the mulch back from around the base to protect from those voles and mice that might want to live here around the trunk. And once we've got that pulled back, then we go ahead and use paper wrap, and we'll start at the bottom and wrap this tree. Now this is going to put an extra layer of protection around the tree for when that deer comes back. Now you'll notice here at the bottom I've left a little piece up. It's kind of like bandaging your wrist or something like that. You'll catch that in the bottom and then start to wind around the tree and overlap those layers. Now I've got that bottom caught in there, so it's going to stay down. Now there's a reason that you want to start at the bottom of the tree and wrap up. There really is a method to this. But you'll notice as I'm wrapping this around how the layers overlap each other, and they act somewhat like the shingles on the roof of your house would. They're overlapping, and yet they're going down. And so when it rains, the rain is not going to fall in. If I would do this from the top down, I would have a pocket at each of these places where it overlaps, and that would catch water, and that could cause the bark to rot. So this is very important. You'll also notice that I haven't applied any salve or pruning varnish or anything to this cut here. I want to leave that because trees actually heal best if you can leave them, and this will start to heal over. So I continue wrapping around this. Now this is also a good thing to do for trees to protect them from sun scald or southwest damage during the winter. So if you have a small tree and its trunk isn't shaded through the winter, you might want to think about wrapping it with paper to protect that bark from sun scald, because what happens is during the cold days of winter that bark will heat up, and then as it cools down at night it will freeze because it thinks it's spring and it's not. So this tree wrap can help guard against that too. Now I've almost got this to the top, and I'm going to secure this with some masking tape here at the top, and I'll leave a little piece here and kind of tuck that around underneath, and then take some of my tape and tape that right here. And I want to make sure that I'm taping this onto the paper and not taping this onto the bark. You want to make sure that the tape is on the paper, and also use masking tape or something that will give. Don't use something like plastic electrical tape. So I've got this all secured away, and now I'm going to pull around our fence here. And secure it with some wire. We've got a pole here to keep it upright so that it doesn't lean up against the tree too much. And we'll wire that in. Very well. And for good measure, because we know that our deer will be back, we've hung some deer repellent from this. Now, there are many things on the market that can repel deers. We've got some actually deer repellent here that has a little bit of capsaicin in it, and it also has some blood meal in it. You can use human hair or even bars of scented soap that can repel deer. But the thing is, the soap, it helps if you keep it moist, if you mist it, so that there's more of a scent there. And also it helps if you change these things out. Don't just put one thing up and leave it. You're going to have to change these out because the deer get used to them. So if you can have a whole selection of things to repel deer on hand, that will help. Well, now that we've got this tree secured, we're going to be watching all of our other trees to make sure that the deer don't mark other ones. So you want to keep an eye out for this. This actually happens the first part of November. So watch out for those deer that might be marking your trees and catch them before they destroy them.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.